Hello, everyone. This is Micah, aka edeneyetarot. Thank you for joining me again for this video. Today, we're going to be talking a little bit about Pallas Athene in Taurus. I think at the time of me actually having this video out, Pallas Athene probably already went into Taurus. I do believe she went into Taurus the same day as the eclipse, if I'm not mistaken. If it was like earlier, then I'll put it down in the actual like somewhere in this video. But I do believe she went into Taurus on the 30th, the same day as the eclipse. And I just kind of love that because there's so much happening in Taurus. At the time, of course, the sun is in Taurus. We're going to have Mercury retrograde back into Taurus. And with all of this stuff kind of, being stirred up in Taurus, like also with having an eclipse in Taurus, and all this energy being brought up around concepts such as like fertility and consumerism, food, where is our food coming from, land, all those things are Taurus things. We're going to eventually see Pallas Athene square off with Saturn. And so let's kind of rewind a little bit and talk about Pallas Athene as an asteroid, and I guess as a goddess in mythology, and then we'll kind of get into the astrology of it. Or I guess I'll just kind of like relay as I go. I'm going to try and like start to almost like maybe like shorten my videos a little bit. I want to make it like, kind of watchable for everybody. So I'm going to do my best to make this one a little bit shorter, but who knows? I want to also make sure that all of the information that I think is important to get out there about Pallas Athene and all the asteroids, since that's something I'm really passionate about, does get out there. Pallas Athene, or Athena, is of course the goddess of wisdom, but she was also the goddess that was, I guess, the more tactful, more, I guess, like a level-headed counterpart of Mars. She wasn't as chaotic. She was that feminine representation of intelligence, wisdom when it came to war. And so she wasn't as hot-headed. She was a lot slower, maybe to like, act on things. She was a bit more, I think, like level-headed is a good word for it. And so when we look at Pallas Athene, when we're talking about mythology, we're looking at a goddess that really is looking further into things before making decisions and really planning things out more and not just going on impulse. She was also a goddess that was associated with the arts, and in astrology, she comes to be known as kind of like that divine wisdom that comes from like putting creativity and actual facts together. So it's almost like creativity gives way to wisdom or intellect. Finding a way to put creativity to like practical use can also be a way that Pallas Athene is shown. And so we can see this in things like, she created knitting, basically, or knitting, weaving, or those are, art forms that, of course, are art forms, but they're also very helpful. They are like in various ways, like mentally, but also like it helps to like, when you knit something, you can make clothes out of those. Like, and one of the, I think the biggest things with Pallas Athene is it's not like, the creativity that comes from Pallas Athene or that she's associated with is just about creativity. It's also about that art furthering in, really helping to civilize and, structure civilization. And so when we see Pallas Athene, we're really looking at, that kind of like interaction between creativity and what is actually needed for success at the time. And so speaking of like, knitting and pottery and, all those really intricate like ways of being creative, I want to bring also to your attention that Pallas Athene was also associated with healing as well, and hand-eye coordination, and learning styles, even learning disabilities are under her rulership, and how we learn and perceive things. And so when we're looking at Pallas Athene going into the sign of Taurus, I keep like kind of like jumping around here, but when we're looking at Pallas Athene going into the sign of Taurus, the only other thing I wanna bring up is that Pallas Athene, of course, she was born from her father's head, and so she didn't have that mother counterpart, so to speak. True, Zeus swallowed Metis, and so she had a mother, but not really. And so a big part of Pallas Athene in astrology and taken from mythology is that there is some struggle with identifying with the divine masculine and the divine feminine, and how do you balance those, and how do you identify with that more feminine side. We'll see with people that have a very prominent Pallas placement, sometimes, especially in women, there is sometimes this very there's a struggle of trying to balance that out, and that can come out in ways of being a very ambitious woman, someone that's more focused on like work and what you're aspiring towards, and like getting those kinds of things done, going to war, and like not going to war, or like being very productive and active, and maybe more of like a man's world kind of situation. And so we can see some issues with like women's rights come up. If any of you know some stories about Pallas Athene, the story of Athens and Pallas Athene's competition with Poseidon. And from that, from that story, we actually get a visual of where we see women's rights kind of coming up, and some of the struggles that Pallas Athene brings up, because it brings up the idea that even when you win, you lose in some way. By taking on that focus on winning and showing that creative brilliance, it is almost too much for the male ego. And I don't want to make this sound like I am like generalizing this for all men or anything like this, but this is the astrology behind it. Is that double standard that we see a lot of times between men and women. Women are not allowed to, be maybe more creative and bright, and be able to maybe compete at the same level as men when it comes to the back and forth of like the work world or the workforce, because then they're seen as like a shrew, or they're seen as like this iron woman, and they're expected maybe, and even think of like when women are young, they're taught to play dumb, they're taught to do cooking and cleaning. Pallas Athene is not about that. Like when we're talking about the goddess or the asteroid, with people that do have that very prominent asteroid, they really struggle with that, the more, I guess, like feminine side. And coming to terms with that, it's like a very much like a workforce, or like a ambition versus like love and relationships. Because a lot of times, because Pallas Athene was seen, I guess, as more androgynous in mythology and in astrology, people with a lot of Pallas Athene kind of characteristics will favor companionship with the opposite sex more so than like actual like love relationships. Remember that Pallas Athene was also she was a virgin goddess, and so it's not really valued as much, and it's more like just being kind of like one of the guys is more of a thing to kind of be able to blend in, to be able to be accepted in that world, and trying to create the balance in that way. And so when we see Pallas Athene coming into the sign of Taurus, one, we can see a lot more people maybe learning to ground within themselves and finding success by learning how to really focus the mind through physical activities that do have to do with, being really grounded in your body. So like I know I like talk about Tai Chi a lot, but it's but Tai Chi, because it is such a very focused martial art, and when we're talking about like the goddess of war in some shape or form, that isn't as chaotic. We are talking about like something like Tai Chi, or I'm not sure any other like martial arts that I'm sure there are other martial arts. I mean, actually, I think all martial arts in some way, shape, or form are going to be very focused like that. And it's very much like a mind thing. Pallas Athene is very much about like connecting the mind and the body together to create healing. And so we can even see like healing or therapies that are coming through connecting the mind and the body, such as like visualization really coming up. But with Taurus, I think it's really going to be emphasized more so about like the grounding part in the body, because Taurus is the senses. And so it's like perceiving. What are you perceiving through your senses? And how are you interacting with that? How do you feel about that? What do you do with that information? I think we could see a lot of really cool things coming up with new inventions as far as like maybe how we use art to make money, or how art is utilized to help the environment. In particular, we can't forget that Taurus is the land, and when Pallas Athene is in Taurus, we can even see maybe some issues either around needing to heal the land, or we could also see some fights, breaking out over like, I guess where does a territory line start and end? What land what land can we have and what land can't we? Again, and we have to remember that eventually Pallas Athene will square up against Saturn in Aquarius. So it's like all the collective, and Taurus is literally like our resources. But it can also be, maybe how the government is kind of doling out food resources as well, and like some conversations coming up around those kinds of things, because we have to remember that Mercury will also retrograde back into Taurus, while Pallas Athene is also in Taurus as well. And I mean, I think this kind of goes without saying with all like this Roe versus Wade kind of things going on. I think we'll see obviously a lot more conversations around that, because Taurus is, of course, a Venus ruled sign, which is about women. And Pallas Athene, being about women's rights to an extent, it's interesting with Pallas Athene that it's about women's rights and the double standards that come along with being a woman, and the questions of what comes along with that. What does it mean to be a woman? It really challenges gender roles, and it really is going to ask us some hard questions about that. What are we allowed to do as women? Or, how are women allowed to express themselves, and even how are men allowed to express themselves, and what is balanced, what's fair, and how do we interact with each other? I think we can see a lot of the government making some very interesting moves when it comes to, and I think these are things that obviously Taurus being a fixed sign, it's things that they're kind of like really pushing, continuing on. They're trying to really push things forward. They've already been started. They're just trying to like keep them going. And so we could see a lot more restrictions when it does come to like maybe trying to shut down new creative ways of, either helping the environment, or, creating new systems for help, creating a surplus for, the environment. Like I read in an article a couple days ago about like how apparently there is some interest in creating like a pipeline, like in the Western states, to because there's a water shortage, and so they want to take water from the Great Lakes and create like a pipeline to kind of like start siphoning water from the Great Lakes into like, that whole western area of the country. And I'm like, wow, isn't that like such a Pallas, Athene, and Taurus thing? Like, because it is like a very, interesting, creative way of like trying to create some sort of surplus. But then the question becomes, how long does that success kind of come up? I think we could also be seeing some interesting things come up like with women's rights when it comes to not just politicians, but also like the wives or the right hand women. So maybe like the vice president, maybe taking some sort of stance on this. Pallas, Athene is very much not about, necessarily being the leader, but almost like being the, how they say like the man is the head of the household, but the woman is the neck. She like Pallas, Athene is the neck, especially since she is in Taurus, Taurus ruling the throat, and I think we can see either a lot of like conservative women or like wives of politicians or just like right hand people or women in particular really making a big influence in what happens when it does come to resources, when it does come to like new inventions, when it does come to really talking about women's rights. Those, I think, it's their time to shine right now. But I think the only downside is that mythologically Pallas, Athene, I forget the actual like story, but there was a story where Pallas, Athene, she was there was a man that was on trial, and I forget exactly what he did, but it was some offense, and she ruled in favor of this man, and it was almost like a betrayal to her feminine counterparts. And so I'm wondering if we're going to see some of these women of like these, powerful men, like almost, I mean, it wouldn't surprise me if they are very crucial or very pivotal in making, helping make decisions that almost like hurt women on a whole, like on a collective level, or set us back in some way. What I am excited about for Pallas, Athene in Taurus is going to be, of course, that more artistic, creative side that, kind of helps to like push things forward when we're talking about like, being more progressive, finding new ways to think outside of the box, finding new inspiration when it does come to finding new ways of like, working the land and feeding ourselves and really, maybe finding new ways to garden. Again, we have to like think Taurus is like all about like that tangible kind of stuff and working with soil, especially when it does come to that square with Aquarius, because Saturn actually rules like gardeners, farmers, and soil. And so maybe like new laws can come up when it does come to those people. Hopefully it's positive, but I could see like, finding like, new ways of gardening, maybe indoors. Like I know that I think like vertical gardening, I do apologize if I'm misnaming or like not naming that correctly, but that's like, I think that's become like a really big thing. Or maybe it's just like the community that I run in, but like, or like, gardening from scraps, I know has become really big, but people finding new ways to feed themselves with everything kind of like, really with inflation and everything like that. I think a lot of that is because of Pallas, Athene, along with, everything else that's going on. It's almost like the asteroids kind of like just add to, or not kind of like the asteroids kind of like, they fall into sync with everything else that's going on. There's always a theme with astrology, even with transits, not just your birth chart. It's always like, transits, they always sync up to really push, one theme forward. And that's kind of like what I love about astrology. But that is my little breakdown of Pallas Athene and her ingress into the sign of Taurus. Let me know, where is Pallas Athene in your chart? I would love to hear from you guys. If you want to book a reading with me, go ahead and click the link down below. Follow me on all my social media, like and share this video, subscribe if you're not already, and I will see you guys next time. Bye.